The summer heat hit like a wall the moment she stepped out of her car. It was one of those Saturday afternoons where the air felt thick enough to chew on, and the sun seemed determined to bake everything in sight. She grabbed her small duffel bag from the passenger seat and headed toward the entrance of Riverside Shooting Range. At 42 years old, she had learned to move through the world without making a fuss. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a comfortable t-shirt that had seen better days. Nothing about her appearance screamed expert marksman, and that was exactly how she liked it. After 15 years of competitive shooting, she had long stopped feeling the need to prove herself before she even picked up a gun. The parking lot was nearly full, which wasn't unusual for a weekend. Through the glass doors, she could see the range was packed with shooters. The familiar smell of gun oil and powder residue greeted her as she walked inside. The lobby was buzzing with conversation and the distant pop of gunfire. From the range itself, she made her way to the counter where an older gentleman with silver hair and weathered hands was checking in another customer. His name was Frank, and he had been running this range for over 20 years. They had known each other for quite a while now. As she waited her turn, her attention drifted to a group of 4 men standing near the entrance to Lane 7. They were impossible to miss, really. Their voices carried across the lobby as they discussed their firearms and shared stories about their shooting experiences. All of them were dressed in expensive tactical gear, the kind you see in magazines or online stores catering to serious enthusiasts. One of them was showing off what looked like a custom pistol with all sorts of modifications. His friends gathered around, nodding appreciatively and throwing in their own comments about calibers and modifications. The whole scene had an air of performance to it, like they were as interested in being seen as expert shooters as they were in actually shooting. She noticed one of them glance in her direction. He was a stocky guy with a thick beard and sunglasses pushed up on his head despite being indoors. He nudged the man next to him and gestured toward her with a slight tilt of his head. The second man looked over and she caught the smirk that crossed his face. They exchanged a few words she couldn't hear, but the body language was clear enough. She had seen it before, more times than she cared to count. Frank finished with his customer and turned to her with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good to see you again," he said warmly. "The usual?" "Please," she replied, returning the smile. "Lane 3 if it's available." Frank chuckled as he pulled out the paperwork. "Lane 3 it is. Right next to our friends over there." He lowered his voice slightly. "They've been here about an hour. Lots of talk, average shooting." She filled out the rental form while Frank prepared her lane assignment. The group's conversation had grown louder, their laughter more boisterous. She had the distinct impression they were performing for an audience. Now, after collecting her lane key and the rental pistol, a standard 9mm that had clearly seen plenty of use, she picked up 2 boxes of ammunition and headed toward the range entrance. The group had already moved inside, and she could hear their voices echoing through the concrete space. Lane 3 was indeed right next to Lane 7, separated only by a low divider. She set her bag down and began the familiar process of setting up her station. Everything had its place and its order. Magazine here, ammunition there, safety equipment within easy reach. These rituals had become second nature over the years, a meditation of sorts before the focus required for shooting. The men in the next lane were already firing. Between shots, their conversation continued at volume that suggested they either didn't care who heard them or actively wanted everyone to listen. They were discussing shot placement, debating the merits of different stances, and generally talking shop in the way that people do when they want others to know they're knowledgeable. She methodically loaded her first magazine, each round sliding into place with a satisfying click. Her movements were efficient and practiced, wasting no motion. This was the part she actually enjoyed, the quiet preparation, the mental shift from everyday concerns to the singular focus required for precision shooting. "First time?" The voice came from her left. She glanced over to see one of the men leaning against the divider between their lanes. He was younger, maybe mid-30s, with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The tone of his question made it clear he wasn't actually asking. She offered a polite smile and returned to her preparation without answering. Sometimes silence was the best response. "Hey, no need to be nervous," another voice chimed in. This one belonged to the bearded man who had noticed her earlier. "We all started somewhere. Nothing to be embarrassed about. His friends laughed, and she could feel their attention focused on her now. All four of them had stopped shooting to watch her setup. She continued her routine, carefully positioning her ear protection and safety glasses. "Sweetheart, you might want to move that target closer," the bearded man continued. His tone was dripping with a condescension that he probably thought sounded helpful. "Starting at 50 feet is going to be frustrating for a beginner. Trust me, I've been doing this for 5 years." She still said nothing, simply adjusting her stance and checking the pistol one more time. The silence seemed to bother them more than any response would have. There was a brief pause in their commentary, as if they were waiting for her to acknowledge their expertise or ask for help. "Maybe someone should check her stance," one of them muttered, not quite under his breath. "Don't want anyone getting hurt. Probably never even held a gun before," another added, his voice carrying that particular mix of amusement and dismissal. The bearded man, who seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group, leaned further over the divider. "Look, no offense, but this isn't really the kind of place where you just figure it out as you go. It's dangerous. Maybe one of us should give you some pointers before you start." Through her ear protection, their voices were muffled but still audible. She could hear the laughter, the self-assured tone, the assumption that they knew everything about her capabilities based on nothing more than a glance. Frank, the range officer, had positioned himself near the back wall where he could observe all the lanes. She caught his eye for a brief moment. He was standing with his arms crossed, and there was something in his expression, a knowing look, almost expectant. He had seen this play out before, though perhaps never quite with someone of her particular background. $20 says she can't even hit the target," one of the men said to his friends, his voice loud enough to carry. "You're on," another replied. "I'll give her 3 shots. If even one hits anywhere on the paper, you win." The group erupted in laughter again, apparently finding this wager hilarious. They had completely abandoned their own shooting now, fully committed to spectating what they assumed would be an embarrassing display of incompetence. She took a slow breath and pressed the button to send her target downrange. The mechanical whir filled the brief silence as the paper silhouette traveled down the lane. She watched it go, her expression calm and unreadable. The bearded man shook his head in mock concern. "That's pretty far for a first-timer. Maybe reconsider." She finally turned to look at him directly, her voice steady and clear. "I'll be fine." Something in her tone made him pause, but his pride had already carried him too far to back down now. His friends were watching. Other shooters in nearby lanes had started to notice the commotion, and backing down would mean losing face. "Well, don't say we didn't warn you," he said with a shrug, settling in to watch what he clearly expected to be a confirmation of all his assumptions. The mockery didn't stop. If anything, it got worse once she started setting up her equipment in earnest. The 4 men had completely abandoned any pretense of doing their own shooting. They were now fully committed to providing running commentary on what they assumed would be a disaster. "Check out that grip," one of them said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "That's not how you hold it." She ignored him, continuing her preparation with the same methodical care she always used. Each movement was deliberate, practiced. She had done this thousands of times, and muscle memory guided her hands even as her mind filtered out the noise around her. The bearded man who seemed to lead the group stepped closer to the divider. "Seriously, I'm not trying to be rude here, but you're going to hurt yourself with that stance. Your feet are all wrong." His friend joined in, his tone mock serious. "Yeah, and you need to lean forward more. Like this." He demonstrated an exaggerated shooting stance that was actually worse than what she was doing. The others laughed at his performance. She loaded the magazine into the pistol with a smooth, practiced motion. The click of it locking into place was satisfying, familiar. She had held guns that cost thousands of dollars, custom-built competition pieces with hair triggers and perfectly balanced grips. This rental pistol was nothing special, just a working gun that had seen plenty of use. But in the right hands, it would do exactly what it was supposed to do.
"How much you want to bet she drops it after the first shot?"
one of them whispered loudly. "Recoil's gonna surprise her." "Nah, I bet she closes her eyes," another replied. "First-timers always close their eyes." The bearded leader waved his hand dismissively. $20 says the target comes back completely clean. Not a single hole. She could feel eyes on her from other lanes now. The group's loud commentary had drawn attention, and several other shooters had paused to see what the fuss was about. Some looked annoyed at the disruption. Others seemed curious about what would happen next. The range had taken on the atmosphere of a spectacle, and she was unwillingly at the center of it. Frank, still positioned near the back, caught her eye again. This time she saw the slightest shake of his head, as if to say he was sorry about the situation but knew better than to interfere. He had seen her shoot before. He knew exactly what was coming. She adjusted her ear protection and picked up the pistol, feeling its weight in her hand. It was heavier than her personal competition guns, the grip slightly worn from countless hands. But a gun was a gun, and she had long ago learned to adapt to whatever equipment was available. "Oh, here we go," the bearded man announced like a sports commentator. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to witness history, or at least a lot of missed shots." His friends chuckled, positioning themselves for the best view. One of them pulled out his phone, apparently planning to record the moment. She noticed this but didn't react. Let them record if they wanted. She had nothing to prove to them, but she also had nothing to hide. "Wait, one of the men said suddenly, holding up his hand. "Before she shoots, let's make this interesting." "Real money," the bearded man grinned. "I'm listening. $50. $50 says she doesn't hit the target even once. And I'm being generous. I'm counting anywhere on the paper, not even the actual scoring zones." There was a moment of consideration, then agreement all around. They were so confident in their assessment, so certain that their assumptions were correct, that putting money on it seemed like a sure thing. She lowered the pistol and turned to face them directly. "You're betting on whether I can hit the target?" The bearded man's grin widened. "Yeah, that's right. No offense, but we've seen a lot of beginners come through here. And well," he gestured vaguely at her as if her appearance explained everything. "What distance is your target set at?" she asked, her voice calm and level. He seemed surprised by the question. "What? Your target? What distance?" He puffed his chest slightly. 25 yards. Standard distance, why?" She nodded slowly as if considering something. Then she turned to Frank. "Can you set my target at 50 yards? The effect was immediate. The range didn't go completely silent. There were still people shooting in the farther lanes. But the area around lanes 3 and 7 suddenly got very quiet. The men exchanged glances, their confident grins faltering slightly. 50 yards? The bearded man repeated. "You can't be serious." "I'm serious," she replied simply. One of his friends laughed nervously. "That's twice the distance. You do know that, right? That's pretty far for a pistol." She didn't respond, just waited for Frank to adjust the target system. The old range officer moved without comment, pressing the buttons that would send her target twice as far as the men had been shooting. The mechanical whir seemed louder in the relative quiet. "This is going to be embarrassing," one of the men muttered. "She's going to miss by a mile." The bearded man recovered his bravado quickly. "You know what? Fine, 50 yards. But when you miss, and you will miss, I want you to admit that maybe you should have asked for help. That maybe shooting isn't for everyone." She met his eyes steadily. "And when I hit the target, you admit that maybe you shouldn't judge people before you know anything about them." His face reddened slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Not now. Not in front of his friends and the growing audience of other shooters who had stopped to watch. "Deal," he said firmly. "But it's not going to happen." "Make it official then," she said, extending her hand. "Your $50 against mine. Winner takes all." He stared at her outstretched hand for a moment. His friends were watching, waiting to see what he would do. Other shooters had moved closer now, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. The pressure was on, and his ego had painted him into a corner. "You got yourself a deal," he said, grasping her hand in what was meant to be a power handshake. His grip was too tight, aggressive, trying to intimidate. She didn't flinch, just shook once and released. The target had reached its position now, 50 yards downrange. At that distance, it looked small, the silhouette barely distinguishable in detail. For an amateur with a rental gun, it would be a genuinely difficult shot. For someone who had never fired a gun before, it would be nearly impossible. The men positioned themselves to watch, their phones out and recording. They were so confident, so absolutely certain of the outcome that they wanted to capture it for posterity. One of them was already grinning, probably imagining how he would tell this story later. Frank had moved to a position where he could see everything clearly. Unlike the four men, his expression was neutral, almost expectant. He stood with his arms crossed, waiting patiently for what he knew was about to unfold. She turned back to face the range, the pistol in her hand. The noise around her began to fade as she shifted into the mental space she always entered before shooting. It was a place of absolute focus where the world narrowed down to just her, the gun, and the target. Everything else became background noise. "Anytime you're ready," the bearded man called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No pressure. Just $50 and your dignity on the line." His friends laughed at that, but the sound seemed distant now, unimportant. She checked the pistol one final time, her movements automatic. Safety off. Round chambered. Grip firm but not tense. Stance solid. The other shooters in nearby lanes had stopped their own practice. Word had spread quickly through the range, and people were curious to see what would happen. Would this woman who looked so ordinary somehow pull off an impossible shot? Or would she prove the men right and miss badly? Confirming their assumptions, she raised the pistol, extending her arms in a textbook isosceles position. Her feet were shoulder-width apart, her weight balanced and slightly forward. Every aspect of her posture was perfect, economical, the result of countless hours of training and competition. The bearded man's smirk began to fade as he watched her stance. Something about the way she held herself had changed. Where before she had seemed almost casual, now there was a quality to her presence that suggested competence, experience, expertise. But it was too late for second thoughts now. The bet was made, the audience was watching, and the moment had arrived. The weight of the pistol in her hands felt familiar, almost comforting. She had held countless firearms over the years, each with its own personality, its own quirks. This rental gun was nothing special, but it didn't need to be. A good shooter could work with anything. She focused on her breathing first. That was always the foundation. Slow breath in through the nose, hold for a moment, then a controlled exhale through the mouth. This wasn't just some technique she had read about in a manual. This was 15 years of competition, 15 years of training her body and mind to work in perfect synchronization. The target at 50 yards looked impossibly small. The silhouette was there, but at that distance the details were minimal. The scoring rings that would be clearly visible at 25 yards were barely distinguishable now. It was the kind of shot that even experienced shooters might struggle with, especially using an unfamiliar rental pistol. Behind her, she could hear the men whispering among themselves. Their earlier bravado had quieted somewhat, replaced by a nervous anticipation. They had committed to this bet, recorded it on their phones, and made it public. There was no backing out now. "She's taking forever," one of them muttered, probably trying to figure out which end the bullets come out of. A few scattered chuckles followed, but they sounded forced, uncertain. The mood had shifted in some subtle way that even they could feel. She aligned the sights, focusing on the front sight post while letting the target blur slightly in the background. This was a fundamental principle that every shooter learned eventually, though many struggled to actually implement it. The front sight was everything. The target would take care of itself if the fundamentals were solid. Her stance was locked in now, every muscle engaged but not tense. There was a difference between rigidity and stability, and she had learned that difference years ago. Rigid shooters fought against the recoil. Stable shooters absorbed it, controlled it, worked with it. The range around her seemed to fade even further. She was vaguely aware of people watching, of the men with their phones recording, of Frank standing silently in the back. But none of that mattered anymore. There was only the shot. She had made harder shots than this. In competition, under time pressure, with scores on the line and judges watching every movement. She had shot in wind, in rain, in heat that made the air shimmer and distort the target. She had shot while exhausted, while injured, while dealing with equipment malfunctions that would have made lesser shooters quit. This was just one shot, 50 yards. A stationary target, no time limit, no wind. Perfect conditions, really. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, taking up the slack. This particular pistol had a trigger pull that was heavier than she preferred, a bit gritty in its movement. But she had felt it during her dry-fire practice earlier, and had already adjusted for it mentally. Every gun had its idiosyncrasies. The key was adaptation. Another breath. In hold, begin the exhale. Somewhere in that exhale, in that moment between heartbeats, the shot would break. It wasn't something she consciously decided anymore. It just happened, the result of training that had become instinct. The bearded man shifted his weight behind her, his nervousness manifesting in small movements. She could feel his doubt now, could sense that he was beginning to realize he might have made a mistake. But it was far too late for regrets. 1 second passed, then 2. The range held its breath with her. Her finger increased pressure on the trigger, smooth and steady. Not a jerk, not a pull, just a gradual increase of pressure until the mechanical breaking point was reached. The shot rang out. The sound of a gunshot in an enclosed range is distinctive, sharp and percussive in a way that echoes off concrete walls and makes your chest vibrate. This shot was clean, crisp, the kind of sound that experienced shooters recognize as fundamentally correct. The recoil pushed back into her hands and up slightly, but her stance absorbed it easily. She rode the recoil, letting the gun rise naturally and then settle back down to target. Her eyes never left the sights, tracking through the entire motion. Then she did something that made several of the watching shooters inhale sharply. Without pausing, without checking the target, she calmly engaged the safety and set the pistol down on the bench. Her movements were casual, unhurried, as if she had just completed the most routine task in the world. The bearded man stared at her. "You're not even gonna check?" She turned to look at him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Check what?" "The target. You didn't even look to see if you hit it." She pressed the button to retrieve the target, and the mechanical whir filled the sudden silence. "I know if I hit it," she said simply. The men exchanged glances. Their confidence was crumbling now, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Something about her absolute certainty was unnerving. People who missed didn't act like this. People who missed were eager to check the target, hoping for the best but expecting disappointment. She stood there calmly, arms at her sides, watching as the target made its way back down the lane. The paper silhouette grew larger as it approached, details becoming clearer with each passing second. Frank had moved closer now, positioning himself where he would have a clear view when the target arrived. His expression was neutral, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he was enjoying this moment immensely. Other shooters had abandoned their lanes entirely now, gathering in a loose semicircle to witness the outcome. This had become the entertainment of the afternoon, a drama unfolding in real time. Some of them had seen beginners at the range before and knew what to expect. Others had caught something in her demeanor, in the perfection of her stance and technique that suggested this might be different. The target was halfway back now. At this distance, individual bullet holes would start to become visible if there were any. The 4 men were leaning forward, squinting, trying to make out details before the target completed its journey. "I don't see anything," one of them said, his voice carrying a note of relief. "I think she missed." "Wait," another said, less certain. "There's something." The target continued its mechanical crawl down the track. 20 feet away, 15 feet, 10 feet. The silhouette was fully visible now, every detail clear, and then, as it reached the station and locked into place, a collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. There, in the center of the target's head, was a single hole, not in the chest, not scattered across the silhouette, but one perfect hole punched through the exact center of the cranial occlusion zone. The kind of shot that law enforcement and military trained for. The kind of shot that competition shooters practiced for hours to perfect. The kind of shot that beginners didn't make by accident. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the shooters in the distant lanes seemed to have paused, as if the entire range was holding its breath. Frank was the first to move. He stepped forward and carefully removed the target from its clips, holding it up so everyone could see clearly. The hole was centered so perfectly that it looked almost artificial, like someone had used a punch tool rather than fired a bullet from 50 yards away. "Dead center," Frank announced, his voice carrying across the range. "Perfect shot." The bearded man's face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. His friends were similarly stunned, their phones still recording but forgotten in their hands, capturing their own shocked expressions for posterity. She turned to face them, her expression calm and pleasant. There was no smugness in her face, no triumph or gloating. She looked exactly as she had when she first walked in. Ordinary, unremarkable. Just another shooter at the range. $50, she said quietly, extending her hand palm up. The bearded man stared at her hand as if it were a foreign object. Around them, other shooters began to react. Someone started clapping and then another, and suddenly the entire range erupted in applause and cheers. People were congratulating each other as if they had witnessed something remarkable, which in a sense they had. The 4 men stood frozen, their earlier confidence completely shattered. They had been so certain, so absolutely convinced of their assumptions, and they had been so completely, utterly wrong. One of the man's friends fumbled for his wallet, his hand shaking slightly. That was, "How did you—" She waited patiently, saying nothing, letting the moment speak for itself. The applause continued, and more people were gathering now, drawn by the commotion and wanting to know what had happened. Frank still held the target, displaying it like a trophy. The single hole in the center seemed to mock every assumption, every condescending comment, every dismissive laugh that had come before it. The bearded man finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that held no malice but made it clear she had been waiting for this question. "Just someone who enjoys shooting." Frank stepped forward, still holding the target with its perfect center hole. His weathered face was creased with a grin that suggested he had been waiting for this moment too. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the growing crowd, "since our friends here seem curious, let me make a proper introduction." The bearded man and his friends looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Their phones were still recording, capturing every moment of their humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They had wanted to document her failure, and instead they had documented their own. "This," Frank continued, gesturing toward her with obvious pride, "is a 3-time national pistol shooting champion. She's held the state record for long-range pistol competition for the last 4 years. And before she started competing professionally, she spent 8 years as a military marksmanship instructor, training soldiers who went on to become some of the best shooters in their units." The applause that had died down started up again, louder this time. Several shooters approached, hands extended for congratulations or requests for autographs. She shook hands graciously, accepting the praise with the same quiet humility she had shown throughout the entire encounter. The 4 men stood rooted to their spot, processing this information. Everything they had assumed, every condescending comment, every mocking laugh, all of it had been based on nothing but their own prejudices and ignorance. She turned back to them, and the crowd quieted, sensing that this moment wasn't over yet. The bearded man was still holding his wallet, his hand frozen halfway to opening it. His face had progressed from pale to a deep red, embarrassment coloring his features. "Keep it," she said, waving away the $50. He blinked, confused. "What?" "Your money." "Keep it." She pulled out a $50 bill from her own pocket and held it out to him. "Actually, here. Take mine." The bearded man stared at the money like it was a snake. "I don't understand." "I don't need your $50, she explained, her voice kind but firm. "But I'm hoping you'll use this money to do something for me." "What?" he asked, his voice small. "Buy yourself a coffee. Sit down with someone who doesn't look like what you expect a shooter to look like. Actually talk to them. Learn their story before you make assumptions about who they are or what they can do." She paused, making sure he was really hearing her. "You might be surprised by what you discover." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the stunned silence of shock or the held breath of anticipation. This was the uncomfortable silence of people confronting their own biases, their own mistakes. One of the bearded man's friends, a tall guy with a baseball cap, stepped forward. His face was flushed with shame. "We were wrong," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We were completely wrong, and there's no excuse for it. We saw you and we assumed." "I know what you assumed," she interrupted gently. "You saw a black woman who didn't look like the stereotype of a shooter. No tactical gear, no expensive custom gun, no obvious signs of experience. So you decided I must be a beginner, that I didn't belong here, that I needed your help or your permission or your approval." The words hung in the air. Several other shooters in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own past behaviors in the description. "It happens more often than you'd think," she continued. "I've walked into ranges all over the country. I've competed in matches where people assumed I was someone's girlfriend tagging along for the day. I've had range officers try to give me the beginner safety speech even after I've shown them my competition credentials." She wasn't angry as she said this, just matter of fact, stating a reality she had lived with for years. The bearded man finally took the $50 she was offering, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words seemed inadequate even as he spoke them. That was terrible. Everything we said, everything we did. I'm really sorry." She nodded, accepting the apology. I appreciate that. But sorry isn't worth much if nothing changes. The question is, what are you going to do differently next time? Another of the men spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. We'll do better. We have to do better. That was inexcusable. It was, she agreed. But here's the thing. Everyone in this range, everyone who walks through that door deserves respect from the moment they arrive. Not after they prove themselves. Not after they show you their credentials or make an impossible shot. From the very beginning. This is supposed to be a place where people come to practice a skill they love. Not a place where they have to fight for the right to be taken seriously. Frank was nodding along with her words, his expression solemn. Several other shooters were nodding too, the message hitting home in ways both obvious and subtle. The bearded man looked at the target Frank was still holding, then back at her. Would you? He started, then stopped, seeming unsure if he had the right to ask for anything. Would you maybe be willing to give me some actual pointers? Real ones, I mean. I thought I knew what I was doing, but clearly, she studied him for a moment, considering. This was the real test, wasn't it? Anyone could apologize. Anyone could feel embarrassed when caught being wrong. But genuine change required more than just words. I run a clinic here, she said finally. First Saturday of every month. All skill levels, all backgrounds. The only requirements are that you come with an open mind and you treat everyone with respect. She looked at all four men. You're welcome to attend. All of you. The bearded man's relief was visible. We'll be there. I promise. Good, she said. And bring that target with you. Frame it, hang it somewhere, you'll see it. Let it remind you that assumptions are dangerous things. He nodded, accepting the advice. One of his friends was already taking the target from Frank, handling it carefully as if it were something precious rather than just a piece of paper with a hole in it. The crowd was beginning to disperse now. The drama concluded, people returning to their own lanes and their own practice. But the atmosphere in the range had changed. Conversations were happening in clusters, people talking more carefully, more thoughtfully. A few newcomers who had been hesitating near the entrance, perhaps intimidated by the environment, were being welcomed by established shooters with genuine friendliness. She watched this ripple effect with quiet satisfaction. One moment, one confrontation, one perfect shot. Sometimes that was all it took to shift a culture, even if just slightly, even if just temporarily. A young girl, maybe 11 or 12, approached shyly with her father trailing behind. The girl was black, her hair in neat braids, her eyes wide with admiration and excitement. Excuse me, the girl said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. That was amazing. What you did. I've never seen anything like it. She knelt down to the girl's eye level, giving her full attention. Thank you. Have you done any shooting before? The girl shook her head. No, but I want to learn. Dad's been saying maybe I'm too young, but after seeing you... She looked up at her father hopefully. The father, a tired-looking man in work clothes, smiled apologetically. She's been asking for months. I wasn't sure if it was just a phase or if she was really serious about it. After today, he trailed off, looking at the target that had caused all the commotion. How old are you? She asked the girl. 12. Almost 13. That's a perfect age to start learning, she said warmly. I started when I was younger than you. The key is proper instruction, patience, and practice. Lots of practice. She looked up at the father. Does your daughter seem serious about wanting to learn? He nodded. She's been researching it online, reading about competitions, asking questions. I think she really means it. She stood and pulled a card from her pocket, handing it to the father. Bring her to my clinic next month. First session is free. I'll teach her the fundamentals, the safety rules, the right way to approach shooting as a discipline. If she likes it and wants to continue, we can talk about ongoing instruction. The girl's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really, you'd teach me? Really, she confirmed. But you have to promise me something. The girl nodded eagerly. Anything. You have to promise that if you stick with this, if you get good at it, you'll remember what it felt like to be the beginner. And when you see someone else starting out, especially if they don't look like what people expect, you'll treat them with kindness and respect. You'll be the person you wish others would be. The girl's expression turned serious, understanding the weight of what was being asked. I promise. Then I'll see you next month, she said, shaking the girl's hand formally. As one shooter to another, the father and daughter left with smiles on their faces, the girl clutching the business card like it was a golden ticket. She watched them go, feeling that familiar warmth that came from knowing she had just opened a door for someone who might otherwise have never walked through it. The four men were still standing nearby, looking like they weren't quite sure what to do with themselves. The bearded leader was holding the $50 bill she had given him, staring at it as if it contained the answers to questions he was only now beginning to ask himself. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. She turned to face him. "Go ahead. Why didn't you just tell us? Right at the start, I mean. You could have just said who you were, shown us some credentials or whatever. Would have shut us up real quick." She considered the question carefully before answering. Would it have, though, really? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, thinking. "Here's the thing," she continued. "I shouldn't have to prove my credentials to be treated with basic respect. Nobody should. The teenager who walks in here for their first lesson, the elderly person trying shooting for the first time, the person who doesn't fit whatever image you have in your head of what a shooter looks like, they all deserve the same courtesy you'd want for yourself." The tall friend with the baseball cap nodded slowly. "But we made it about proving yourself. We made you earn the right to just exist in this space." "Exactly," she said, "and that's exhausting. Imagine having to prove yourself every single time you pursue your passion, every range you visit, every competition you enter, every conversation with other shooters, always having to be twice as good just to be seen as half as legitimate." The words settled over the group like a weight. Around them, the range had returned to normal operations, but several people were still glancing over, still processing what they had witnessed. Frank approached with a clipboard, his expression serious now despite the earlier humor. "You know, in 20 years of running this place, I've seen this same scene play out more times than I can count. Not always exactly like this, but the pattern's the same. Someone walks in who doesn't match the expected profile. They get the comments, the assumptions, the unwanted advice." He shook his head. "Most of them just leave. They don't come back." "How many?" the bearded man asked quietly. "How many what? How many people have we, and by we I mean people like us, how many have we driven away from something they might have loved?" Frank's silence was answer enough. She picked up her pistol and began the process of clearing it, her movements automatic. "That's why this matters. It's not just about me or my ego or winning a bet. It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome, where a 12-year-old girl can walk in and see herself represented, where someone doesn't have to be a champion to be treated like they belong." One of the other men, who had been quiet throughout most of the exchange, finally spoke up. His voice was thick with emotion. "My sister wanted to learn to shoot a few years back. She came to a range with me and my buddies. We thought we were being helpful, you know? Giving her pointers, correcting her form, making jokes to keep things light." He paused, swallowing hard. "She never came back. Told me later it felt like we were treating her like a child playing with toys, like we didn't take her seriously." "Did you apologize?" she asked gently. "Yeah, but it was too late. The damage was done. She took up archery instead, and she's really good at it now, but she still won't set foot in a gun range." The group fell quiet again, each man apparently lost in his own thoughts, his own memories of times when maybe he hadn't been as welcoming as he could have been. She finished securing her equipment and turned to face them fully. "Look, I'm not trying to make you all feel terrible. Well, maybe a little," she added with a slight smile. "But the real point is that you have a choice now. You can walk out of here embarrassed and angry, tell yourselves it was just bad luck that you happened to run into someone exceptional. Or you can actually learn something from this. What would you want us to learn?" the bearded man asked. He seemed genuinely curious now, the defensive bravado completely gone. That competence doesn't have a single look. That expertise comes in all forms. That the person you're dismissing might be the best shooter in the building, but more importantly, that even if they're not, even if they really are a beginner, they still deserve your respect and encouragement. She paused. "This community can be incredible. Supportive, educational, welcoming, but only if we choose to make it that way." Frank nodded approvingly. "She's right. I've seen this range at its best and its worst. When people come together to help each other improve, to share knowledge, to celebrate each other's successes, that's when this place really shines. But when it becomes about ego and gatekeeping, when people use their experience as a weapon to make others feel small, that's when we lose the heart of what this is supposed to be about." A woman approached from one of the other lanes, an older shooter with gray hair and confident bearing. "Mind if I add something?" she asked. "Please," she replied. I've been shooting for 35 years, the older woman said, addressing the four men directly. I've won more competitions than I can remember. And I still get treated like I don't know which end of the gun the bullets come out of at least once a month. Usually by men who've been shooting for maybe 5 years and think that makes them experts. She wasn't angry, just stating facts. So what she's teaching you right now? This isn't just about her. This is about all of us who've had to prove ourselves again and again just to be taken at face value. Other shooters were nodding, some sharing their own quick stories of being underestimated or dismissed. The conversation was spreading, becoming bigger than just one confrontation at one range on one afternoon. The bearded man pulled out his phone and did something that surprised everyone. He deleted the video his friend had recorded. "We don't need this," he said. "We don't need evidence of our stupidity floating around online." "Actually," she said, stopping him before he could delete it from his friend's phone too. "Keep one copy, not to post publicly or to mock yourselves with, but keep it as a private reminder. Watch it when you're tempted to make assumptions about someone. Let it keep you honest." He considered this, then nodded. "That's fair." She gathered her things, preparing to leave. The sun would be setting soon, and she had other things to do with her Saturday evening. But before she could go, the bearded man extended his hand again, this time with genuine respect rather than aggressive bravado. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the lesson." "All of it," she shook his hand. "You're welcome. And I meant what I said, come to the clinic. All of you. There's always more to learn, and part of that learning is how to be better members of this community." As she walked toward the exit, Frank called out to her, "Same time next week?" "Same time," she confirmed. The door closed behind her and the late afternoon heat wrapped around her like a blanket. She could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire continuing inside the range, the rhythm of practice and improvement that never really stopped. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a fellow competitor, asking about her practice session. She smiled and typed back, "Interesting afternoon. Made a new teaching opportunity out of an old problem." As she drove away, she thought about the young girl with the braids, excited and eager to learn. She thought about the four men who had learned a hard lesson about assumptions and respect. She thought about all the other people who would walk into that range in the coming weeks and months, and how maybe, just maybe, the culture would be a little bit different, a little bit more welcoming because of what happened today. Change didn't happen all at once. It happened in moments like these. One person at a time, one interaction at a time. It happened when people chose to be better, to do better, to create the world they wanted to see rather than perpetuate the world that had always been. She had made thousands of perfect shots in her career. Competition wins, record-breaking performances, displays of skill that had earned her recognition and respect. But somehow that single shot today felt more important than most of them. Not because of the technical difficulty, though 50 yards with a rental pistol was genuinely challenging, but because of what it represented, what it taught, what it might change. One shot had destroyed their pride, but in doing so it had maybe, hopefully, opened their minds, and sometimes that was worth more than any trophy or title could ever be. The range grew smaller in her rearview mirror as she headed home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Behind her, inside those walls, the work of building a better community continued. And next month at her clinic, she would be there to guide it, one student at a time, one lesson at a time, one perfect shot at a time.